Cool. I just hit the live on YouTube. So we are live now. Wow.
Yay.
Henry from
Time.
Australia.
Showtime.
Yes, it's show time. And wow, what's the time over there, Danielle?
It's 8 p.m.
So you are in the future. I just hit the
I
live.
am in the future. Yes.
Yeah. Great. So let me just begin our meetup for today. Let me just quickly share my screen. And we have a lot of great stuff to talk about today.
Yeah.
So I hope you can see my screen.
Yes.
Perfect. So welcome to Microsoft Excel Saudi Arabia Power Platform Meetup. We are here today, and today is 10th of June, and I have my lovely friend from Australia. She's here, Danielle. And today she is going to present about financial modeling, some Excel tips and tricks as well. And I'll give her more introduction. So let me quickly start the meetup. And if you haven't known me, that I'm Faraz Shaikh from Saudi Arabia. I'm founder of excelexciting.com and the organizer of My Data Summit, along with my friend Elgar, who is also over here today in the house. And I'm a YouTuber, blogger, and I run this meetup. And as usual, I say my mission with my friends over here, all to give you exciting solutions, how to use the Microsoft Office application, and easy solutions. So this is my passion, to gain and share the knowledge. So the speakers who are coming, wonderful speakers who have come to this meetup, to share their knowledge, and we are very happy to hear and gain the knowledge from them. And today, what I'm really excited about is the summit, My Data Summit. So this summit is will be held on September 5, 6, 7. It will be a mega event. You can scan the QR code. You can visit to mydatasummit.com, and you will find awesome speakers coming up. We have 30 speakers, including Danielle, and I'll be quickly sharing my screen. So this is a mega event happening, and you can check the website. There are all details available over there. And you can make sure that you can get this early bird discounts, and this early bird discounts ends on 30th of June. So make sure that you get your tickets and you are there for this event, okay? And it would be really a lovely house. You know, we will be having Bill Jelen, Ken Paz, Matt Ellington, Gasper, Liam Bastic, people from Australia, you know, Vin, Danielle again, Oz, Chandeep Chabra. This house will be really crazy, you know, because they have 33 jam-packed sessions with Excel. It includes Power App, it includes Power Automate, it includes Power Query, DAX. So it's going to be a lot of fun. And even we are bringing some people from AI. Okay, so Somi Ayaz is from AI, Enterprise DNA, Bob Ulmus. I'm really excited for this event. And we make sure that with this event, you can also come and take your master classes. So we have masterclass from Ken on Power Query, time intelligence with Gasper, budget and forecasting with Danielle, who is over here. And the link in the video description is also available for Danielle. You can go and enroll for her masterclass as well. And then we have Liam Bastic on best practices on financial modeling, Sandeep Chabra for DAX, visualizing data with Oakley, financial modeling again with Rahim Zulfikar Ali, and data presentation with Claudia, and paginated reports. So make sure that you get these. You can check it out, and if you are interested in any of these master classes, make sure that you grab them before 30th of June. So let's go now to the session, the best practice in financial modeling with Danielle. Danielle, it's really lovely to have you over here, and I have been always following your blogs and YouTube videos, and in fact, I came to present also, and it's you really have that charisma, you know, of whenever we are working with Excel and the financial modeling, you know, And thank you for coming today. And I will leave the hot seat to Danielle. She will be talking something about herself, and please feel free to introduce and let's share us what you have today.
Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me. And it was great that I was able to return the favor. So thank you. I was actually the speaker at my meetup just a couple of months ago, so which was fantastic. So thank you for that. And now it's my turn to tell you something about what I feel really passionately about, which is financial modeling. And for a very funny kind of coincidence, but I actually spent most of the day or most of the afternoon yesterday in the Saudi Arabian consulate trying to get my visa for Saudi Arabia. So I'm, I haven't traveled, I haven't been anywhere for 2 years. And this is like my very first overseas training, which is in Saudi, in Riyadh, of all places, if you can believe that. So just getting the visa is a bit of a challenge. So, but yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, really, we are looking forward to see you in Saudi then.
Yeah. Can't wait. Although it is going to be the middle of summer, but it's freezing over here, so I am kind of looking forward to getting out of the cold weather.
By the way, it's really hot over here. I think right now it's around like 42 degrees right now. I just backed from Paris, Friday press. And it's really hot. Yeah.
Looking forward to that. All right, let's get started for today.
Sure.
Do feel free to, it's a fairly sort of informal session, so do feel free to just pop any questions that you have directly into the chat, and I'll monitor that, or I'll stop from time to time and see if there's any questions that people have, anything that's not clear, or anything you'd like me to go into a little bit more detail. We have about an hour, is that right, Faraz?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. So financial modeling is kind of my first love. It's the thing that I live and breathe. It's sort of what I've always done. So Excel is of course the tool that we all know and love. But I only became a Microsoft MVP last year. But I have been working in Excel and using Excel to build financial models for years and years and years. In fact, it's all I've ever done is working in building financial models or teaching people how to build financial models. In fact, I've written a couple of books about financial modeling. So it's basically, what I do all day, every day is either build financial models or talk about building financial models. So that's basically me. But I kind of want to get a bit of an idea from you guys, what you think about what a financial model is, because I suspect that most of you are probably doing a bit of financial modeling already and perhaps haven't really called it such. If you've been using Excel to any extent, you're probably already building models. I'm talking about just standard Excel, none of the fancy Power Automate stuff that Faraz does. So if you'd like to maybe pop in the chat, if I can see the chat, and let me know if anyone has a definition of financial modeling, if anybody would like to take a guess of what a financial or a definition of what a financial model is. It's always really interesting to see what people define as financial models, and to let me know whether you've done any financial modeling in the past, if any. I'll give you a bit of a hint. It's got nothing to do with catwalks. It's got nothing to do with fashion. Yeah. What about you, Faraz? Have you got any sort of ideas or notions of what you would, because there's lots of different interpretations of it, or what your definition or what you consider to be a financial model?
When I think of financial model, two names come up in my mind. That is you and Liam Bastic.
You leave it to us. Yeah, Ilga says. Sorry.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, Ilga says that financial modeling is a task of building representation of the financial situation. Absolutely. Yes, that's right. So the building a representative, so a construct that sort of represents reality or the financial situation, as Ilga says. Yeah. Absolutely, I definitely agree. Naomat says a financial model is used to calculate the impact of a business event. Yes, that's a good one. Yeah, it's.
Financial model is, yeah, that's a really good one. Yeah.
Absolutely true. Very often you have an event or a project or a situation that you are trying to make. Usually you're trying to make a decision, and you want to know whether or not you should invest in this piece of capital, or whether you should purchase something, or whether you should go ahead with this project or something like that. And very often the financial model is for that decision, and it's for building a construct, usually in Excel, for that representation. So that's kind of absolutely correct. Does it need to contain a P&L, a cash flow, and a balance sheet? Sometimes it often does. It very often does contain a P&L, cash flow, balance sheet, but not always. It sometimes could just be a cash flow or a P&L or something like that. Is it just a complex spreadsheet? Often, people say that that's all a financial model is. It's just a complex spreadsheet, but I would say it's perhaps a little more than that. Patricia says that financial modeling supports management in the decision-making and preparation of financial analysis. Absolutely. Thank you, Patricia. Yes. So decision-making, it is often for the purpose of making a decision, is a lot of the time. My definition from the Financial Modelling in Dummies is that it's a tool, which is usually in Excel, that displays possible solutions to real-world financial problems. And that's, pretty much what everyone has said in the chat. That it's you've got a situation and you want to represent that in Excel. The thing to remember, though, of course, is that a financial model is not reality. It's a representation of reality. It is not reality. And that's what people sometimes think, that because the financial model says that we are going to make all this money, then we are obviously going to make all that money. And it's important to remember that a financial model is just a construct. It is not reality, because we're usually looking into the forward future, into the as a forecast, and trying to make decisions. So that's something to remember. It's also important to note that it is not just a spreadsheet. A spreadsheet could be just about anything. A spreadsheet could be just a dump of telephone numbers, whereas a financial model is more structured. There's usually inputs, outputs, calculations, scenarios, that sort of thing. Just having a spreadsheet is, could just be just about anything, anywhere, whereas a financial model will be dynamic. You do need to have links and formulas in a financial model. And I'm sure for you guys who are using Excel, you're probably already doing this and building models perhaps without realizing it. But basically, if you put in an input and that input changes, and the input will have an effect on the output, so inputs and outputs, you change the inputs and the outputs change, then that is part of the definition of it being a financial model. It usually has relationships between variables, so you change this and this goes up, so there's often sort of knock-on effects. You usually have forecasts, so they're almost always looking into the future. There's almost always time series involved in a financial model. And lastly, they do almost always contain hypothetical outcomes. So if you build, we'll talk a little bit about sensitivity and scenarios today. So if you change the inputs, what would happen if this were to change, or what would happen if that would change? If you build the model in a well-structured way, it's pretty easy to make changes and to see what those outputs relate to. Any questions or comments from anybody before we move on? I think we're good. So one of the things,
I'm just monitoring the chat here.
Yeah, great. So I'll be talking today about focusing on best practice financial modeling. And a lot of that relates to these kind of Excel horror stories that we'll talk about. Nayamat is asking about the difference between scenarios and sensitivity analysis. Yeah, we'll get into that a little bit more. But sensitivities is usually when you are just tweaking one or two variables, and scenarios is usually like a whole lot of things. So best case scenario or worst case scenario, whereas, there might be a whole lot of inputs changing, whereas sensitivity is just one or two inputs changing. But we'll get into that a little bit more if hopefully we have enough time to do that. So just going back to the Excel horror stories, a lot of the times the best practice in financial modeling or in using Excel is because of these horror stories. If you've been around using Excel for any period of time, if you are not absolutely terrified of having a mistake in your financial model, you should be, because it is probably the number one thing that strikes fear into the modeler's heart, is that possibility that there could be an error in your model. And I'm sure that you've heard lots and lots of horror stories, which are absolutely terrifying. The possibility, there's no faster way to lose credibility from your team or from your boss if you have an error in your model. So there's lots of, if you Google Excel horror stories, there are, Uspread comes up with the Dirty Dozen, or, these horror stories in Excel. So we try to reduce the possibility for that happening. So, a lot of the time we are trying to reduce a lot of the things that we're doing in best practice as we're building our financial models, is to try to reduce the possibility of errors. And, there's just nothing worse than somebody, you build this model and you're really happy with it, and then your boss says, oh, that doesn't look quite right, or, that numbers perhaps don't add up, and, it's really, really scary. So the kind of errors that are really common are formula errors. So formula errors are pretty easy to make, like it's just really easy to just pick up the wrong cell or something, but it's easy to fix, but it's really embarrassing. So I'll show you some techniques for trying to stop that from happening, to reduce formula errors. There's also the assumptions could be incorrect. So, that's put a bit of an error, and also logic error. So, just the way that the model is calculating could be incorrect as well. So we'll look at some ways to reduce that. So this is what I'd like to sort of take you through today is we'll talk firstly about best practice. We'll look at some ways to reduce error, so some practical strategies that you can use to reduce error. And then lastly, we'll get into some scenarios, sensitivities, and what if analysis. So first of all, we'll talk about financial modelling best practice. And I think, best practice is such an important thing that the two books that I've written, I've actually dedicated an entire chapter to financial modelling best practice. So I'll sort of take you through some of the best bits on each of these. So basically, like 6 different points of best practice for financial modelling. Documentation of assumptions is number 1. So garbage in and garbage out, it's that's probably the thing that's really important to remember, that when you're building your models, is to document those assumptions, and having these really clearly documented is really important. And I'm sure that as Excel specialists, that there are a number of different ways that you can document assumptions in Excel. And those in-cell comments, which Excel 365 has just recently, or fairly recently, changed the comments and the notes. So I might just jump over into Excel and just show you some of those. So, like, for example, that is your sort of old, what they called a comment. So that's now a note, and these are comments. You can create these threaded comments. So this is a really great way of documenting assumptions in a financial model. So you've got something, here you've got something that's hard-coded there, but you wanted to say, something about it, and you might put a comment there, or you might put, some kind of threaded comment like that. There's also the data validation comments. So like when you click on the cell and it comes up, and this is just using, I'm sure you've seen this before, but when you are just going into data and then going into data validation, and in the input message here, you just put in some kind of comment. And so when you click away, it's quite context sensitive. You click on it and it, stops somebody from entering the wrong thing. There's also the footnotes, like this, just having a footnote like that. You can put little superscripts on there. So lots of different ways that you can document the assumptions in a financial model. So I don't really mind what kind of method you use, but it's just important that you use some kind of methods. Some of the other methods of doing it's like this. So putting in, if you're ever going to put any documentation that has numbers and text, so like for example, if you put in some documentation to say, this is our number of customers, you want to actually put that into a formula. So, if we were to say, actually this was 2025, and that would automatically change and everything flows through from there, or this was actually 16,000, like that. So you can see that by using a formula like that, so we're just using the ampersand and we link it through. So those sorts of techniques can really just make your documentation so much easier. Well, it takes a while to build, but it just means that when something changes in your model, it'll just automatically calculate and change. So those are some of the different types of assumptions documentation that you can use in your model. So that was the first point of best practice, was documentation of assumptions. So always making it really clear what the assumptions were in the model. So any kind of analysis, or it doesn't necessarily have to be a full financial model, but any kind of, Excel reporting, you should always document your assumptions. When it comes to building your formulas, one of the points of best practice in financial modeling is to use consistency of formulas. So having one single formula all the way across and down. And this is like Excel 101. This is really, really basic Excel stuff, but having just one formula and then copying across and down, it's just going to save you so much time. So, a few different ways, of course, of doing this. So here, that's sort of your usual way of doing it. So, you don't want to see people going like this and like that and then go to the next one. You want to sort of use your dollar sign. So you put the dollar sign, you anchor the column and you anchor the row, and then you just have one formula across and down. So even if you have like 60 months across and thousands of rows down, it'll just one single formula will just reduce the possibility for error, and also make your formulas or make your financial model much easier to audit as well. Using dynamic arrays, of course, that's another way. I'm not a huge fan of doing it like that. I don't know if what you think, Faraz or Ilga, if you ever use that sort of thing. I find it a little bit difficult to follow. I prefer the first method. You can use,
tried it out, with these, since I'm into logistics, so I really prefer to, use dynamic arrays, because we have a shipping list, and then it has some containers, and we need to calculate the average logistics cost and such kind of things. I feel that time dynamic arrays is really helpful for me to do a calculation to get a specific container and average cost. So in that scenarios, I really use dynamic arrays.
Absolutely.
I have an entries like around like 400 to 500 containers or 600 containers. That's really difficult for me to set in a classic way of referencing it.
And I think some of the formulas that you build, like sequence formulas or unique formulas or filter formulas, are fantastic with dynamic arrays. But using it like this, I don't think is a huge advantage over just doing it like that. I think,
Yeah.
in this case, I think simpler is better. You could use named ranges. I don't see any advantage here of using named ranges. I know we do like using named ranges sometimes in models, when you have a constant, like if there's an assumption like, interest or, currency exchange rates or something like that, and it's a single cell that you're referring to over and over again, then a named range might be good. But in this case, it's not great, because when you copy it across, you've got to change it to that one and then change it. There's absolutely no benefit of doing that. And similarly here, you could do like a dynamic named range, but I really don't see any benefit particularly. I still would probably just go back to using that one. But however you do it, as long as you have some sort of method of having consistency of formulas is definitely important as far as best practice goes. Making sure that we always link. So, if you don't link, then, it's not really a model. If you just have a dump of data, hard-coded data. I had a client actually that sent me a model back today, and they said, the model's not working anymore. When I change the customers or the exchange rate, nothing's changing because the model's not working. And of course, when I traced it back, somebody had hard-coded the formulas, and so the formulas were not there anymore, so the model wasn't working the way that it should. And so it's really important that you have links and not hard coding in a model. So something like this, where you're looking at the project MPV, for example, and it picks up that, so that then, if this were to change to 7%, everything will change, and then that will change, and then that will change. So like everything is driven based on this. So this drives that drives that drives that, and then that drives that. So having these kind of links throughout your model is just a much smarter way to work. So if any of those had been hard coded, then they simply wouldn't update. And I will make this file available if anybody would like to take apart any of those. So so for example, an example in cash flows. So often you've got your sort of corkscrew cash flow. We call it a sort of corkscrew account, where you have your opening cash links to your closing balance, that then links up to your opening cash, that then links down to your opening balance. And of course, if any of that is hard coded, it doesn't work. And even with our financing, you can automate all of that. So you want to have everything like formulas that's going to automatically link. Making sure that you don't hard code inside a formula, and you don't enter a value multiple times. So you enter the value once, and then you link back to that. So like for example, with something like that, like the example that I showed you earlier, you link, say that's headcount here, you change that and it just flows through. So, or like with a start date, you would have, so that's using an EO month function. So often, timing is a big part in financial models. So we're often using our date formulas. So if you were to update that for next year, it'll all just flow through from there. So you just enter once and then it links through. So it's kind of the same principles over and over again. These kind of concepts are going to just make your life so much easier when you're building your financial models. And similarly here, even that I've used a year formula. So when I change that, so if that becomes 2024, then the heading is just automatically updated as well. So I'll just see if there are any. No, I don't think we've got any questions. Do just jump in if there's anything you want me to go over again. Yeah, so always using error checks. I can't tell you how many times an error check has made, yeah, really saved the day for me. You know, any kind of, you know, if you know that that cell must be equal to that cell, and if it's not, you want to know about it. So that's something that you would put an error check in. I'll see if I can show you an example of an error check. Yeah, so like something like that, you know, you've got a list of like a stock report or something like that, and there's a total, and you know, you just use a simple sum if formula there, and you know that the total manual here should be and automatic here, and the total here should be equal to the total there. And if it's not, you know, so you would just put in some kind of formula. You could just go that cell minus that cell. You know, that's one way of doing it. The way I've done it here is I've allowed a tolerance for error. So I've said if the absolute value of the difference between the two is greater than 1, give me an error, otherwise okay. So that's a fairly sort of long-winded way of doing an error check, but that will stop it if somebody puts in, for example, manual space. You know, I've spent many happy hours looking for an invisible space that, of course, you can't see there. So, you know, you can't see it unless you hit the F2 and you can see, there's a space, you know, that sort of thing. You know, an error check can really save it. There's another example here. So like with, so we're going to do, Faraz was saying we're doing the budgeting and forecasting masterclass, and we'll do stuff like this to do with phasing and seasonality, which we do a lot of in forecasting and budgeting. So for example, you know, you've got a monthly amount, so you take this 2.5 million, divide it by 12, and then you phase it, and of course that phasing needs to add up to 12, and you want to make sure that the total, so the annual amount here is equal to the total there, so that when you phase it out, you want it to be the same. And so that's the sort of thing where you would put in an error check to make sure that that's the same. So that's an example there. Yeah, Henry's asking about linking across workbooks. Yeah, great question. Yeah, I prefer to not link if I can with financial models. It's always better to try to have each model self-contained, because of course it's just quite prone to error, you know, having one file that's linking to another file, and you know, the links can mess up. So my preference is, of course, to always try to not have external links, and if you have to, it's always better practice to use you know, just single links. So named ranges perhaps are just going to be a lot less prone to error when it comes to external links. Yeah, so yeah, there may be some situations where it's necessary to have links, but we do try to avoid it if possible, because it's just more prone to error if you do that. And then the last point of best practice is labeling and formatting. So always having, you know, just making it really, really clear. So it's, you know, using symbols for currency, if it's percentages, you know, making sure. Most common source of error is mixing up units, you know, miles versus kilometers, or currency, you know, is it US dollars or is it Australian dollars? You know, they use the same symbol. So making that really clear. So that's something else to be, just to always get into the habit of just being really clear with your formatting and labeling. Naima says the best practice to copy a sheet containing macros from one workbook to another. Best practice is to get rid of those macros entirely if you can. I'm not a big fan of macros, but if you are going to use macros, yeah, I don't know if there really is any best practice particularly. I guess, you know, we try to keep models as simple as possible, and macros can be quite difficult to audit and for others to check.
Yeah, I agree with that, Danielle. Yeah. Macros, like one risk is like if you if you like store it in your personal macro workbook, then there's a high chance like if you crash your system, then you lose all that macros.
Yeah. I find, a lot of what we used to use macros for, you can do now with Power Query or Power BI. Yeah, it depends. I mean, I know people still use macros, but yeah, we do try to avoid them if possible. Yeah, cool. Yeah, so that's just a few points on financial modeling best practice. So I'll jump in now to some technical strategies, unless there's any other questions about the financial modeling best practice that we went through. We'll jump into some strategies to reduce error now. So this is taken from this new book, which is that one there, the financial modeling for in Excel for Dummies. So there's a whole section on strategies to reduce error. So I'll go through, each of those. A lot of it really is just common sense. Things like using the enter key. We often see people clicking somewhere else instead. So, like for example, people will, you finished with the formula and then you click somewhere else, and that's okay. But sometimes it will, if I can get it to. Yeah, most of the time it'll work, but sometimes you're in the middle of a formula and it can just kind of mess up, and they sort of move on and they haven't looked. They haven't looked at what happened. So your best practice is really to after you've hit the enter key, to look at the formula. Does the value look correct? Is it right? Does it look correct? So always kind of checking your work. So hit the enter key. Does it check it again? Check it. So make sure that the formula looks right, and does the value look correct? You should always know what that value should be. So get an idea of what you expect the value to be before you hit the enter key, and go, yes, that is correct. So when you're in here, you're saying, well, I'm doing an offset. It's 1 month, so it's $437 in January, so I'm going back a month, so I would expect that to be 0. So when you hit the enter key, you kind of already know what you expect that to be. So that's probably your front line of defense against errors. So hit the enter key and say, does it look right? And then check it again. Use the F2 key, and maybe do a bit of a sense checking to just make sure that the values are correct. So you do the one in the top left hand corner, copy it across and down, use the F2 key just to do some sense checks and make sure that the values are correct. And when you've checked it 3 times, have someone else check your work. So, I used to have a bit of a deal with one of my colleagues, and I'd say, I'll check your models if you check mine, because it's really, really boring checking somebody else's models. I don't know if anybody's ever had to do auditing of a model, of like an Excel audit, but it's really not a lot of fun having to go through somebody else's formulas. But sometimes, they can find something that you have just completely missed. So having someone, if it's a really important model that you need to be absolutely sure that there's no errors, making sure that you've documented assumptions, making sure that that it's really clear what those assumptions are, and then explaining it to the decision makers, because that can really flush out any errors that are there. And then this will flush any logic errors. So looking at the methodology. So there was total population, for example. This comes from a business case that we did for at one of my financial modeling courses. We do total population. We look at the ownership of that population, and then we look at the potential market, and then we calculate the take-up rate. And then, so by kind of flow charting that, you can really flush out by explaining it to someone else if there's potentially a logic error there. Stress testing is another thing you can do, put in some like really crazy numbers into the model. So like, if you have a revenue model and you put revenue price to 0, you would expect that your revenue would be 0 as well. And if it's not, you'd want to know why. So those are the sorts of things that you could do, like, doubling your head count, do the staff cost double, change the growth to 0. Does it remain the same? Those sorts of tests that you can do, after you finish the model, and then just really stress test the model to make sure that there's no errors in there. So that will just sort of really test your understanding of the model if the logic is correct. Scenarios we'll get into. So that's a good way of, just, I guess, a way of stress testing as well. But like if you're looking at, best case scenario, and then comparing that to worst case scenario, and you'd say, well, actually, they're not that much different. Or, these kinds of, can really, just help you to really understand what's going on in the model. Any Excel errors. I quite like seeing Excel errors. I know many Excel users don't like to see these errors. Like, oh no, something's happened with my model. But I would much rather see a number like this than a number that looks like it's right when it's completely wrong. So I'd much rather see this sort of error.
Yes.
Do you agree, Faraz?
Yeah, I really agree with you. First time when I was using Excel, I ran into that hash errors, and I was like, why my numbers are not coming up? And then slowly I discovered about it. So
the
goes through that phase of errors, and that's the way how we learn from that errors.
And I mean the spill error is a new type of error, which might have had a few people a bit freaked out if they've been using Excel for a long time, and then all of a sudden you get a new type of error. So like you have a list here and you try to put in a dynamic array using that, and you end up with a spill error because it's trying to spill and something's in the way. So that's and then it's fine, of course. That's a new type of error. But any of those basically are good. I try not to use the if error, so you can suppress errors. I know I did it in that offset formula, but I do prefer to not use if error around it, just so that we always get so that we see if there's an error. You'd really want to know about it. And the last one is not really an error. It's like a circular reference. Are pretty horrible having a circular reference in a model. And oranges are called orange because they're orange, or is orange called orange because oranges are orange? So that's, I guess, a circular reference, perhaps. But we often get circular references in models. And to make it even worse, you sometimes get deliberate circular references. There are some models that we say you actually allow a circular reference. I don't know if you've ever had this, Ilgar or Faraz, or any of the audience, whether you've ever had a circular reference in a model that is okay, that you've actually gone into the options. Henry says the fruit comes first. Yeah, I think it does actually. Where there are certain situations when you do actually want the circular reference to be there. In my opinion, I think it's a really bad idea, but I know that it's a kind of a regional preference. I know that a lot of modelers in the US do actually enable iterative calculations in certain situations. Has anyone ever had that experience? I'm not a big fan personally.
I never tried that.
Yeah. One of the situation that we often use it in financial modeling is that you have your interest calculation. So interest is basically is an input to your P&L. So whatever interest you pay is going to drive your income statement. and that will drive your profit, and the profit will drive your cash flow, and the cash flow will drive your funding, and your funding drives your debt, and the debt drives your interest, and the interest drives your P&L, and then your P&L drives your cash flow, and you end up with a circular reference. And I know that a lot of modelers will say that that's allowed, and that you would actually allow that iterative calculations. I don't think it's generally a good idea. So most of the time with a circular reference, you just want to hunt it down and kill it, like get to the bottom of it, find the circular reference, and just stop it in its tracks. That's really what, in my opinion, what you should do. But you may, just a note that you may come across some models that actually have allowable circular references. And lastly, error checks. So a good financial modeler is always looking for opportunities to include error checks. So we do always, you know, a good modeler will always have an error check in their model. And whenever you identify, you know, that this is equal to that, then you would put an error check in there. You know, make sure that you pay attention to them. Don't just ignore them. The example that I showed you earlier, we use conditional formatting so that it really pops up, you know, so you can see when the error is there. So when there's an error, it will change color. And to always build as you go. So build those error checks, you know, as you're building the financial model, definitely. So those were the 10 strategies for reducing errors. So were there any questions or comments on those before we get into the next section? I know I kind of went through that quite fast, but I know that we are recording, and you can always go over it again, and I'll give the files, make those available to you.
Sure. Break up long format into short ones.
Yeah, so Henry says to break long formulas into shorter ones. Absolutely. They say the rule of thumb is that a formula should be no longer than your thumb. and yeah, I definitely agree. That is good practice, Henry, to try to not have really long, complicated formulas. I know that when we get really good at Excel, we want to show off and show how clever we are, and we can build nice, big, long formulas. And yeah, it's not really clever to do that. Yeah, it's a good idea to try to keep things as simple as possible, and to break up the calculations into different components rather than trying to do everything at once. Naomat says, is there a practice that can be followed for removing circular references? I'm so glad you asked that, Naomat. Yes, there is an easy way of doing that. Let me see. So I haven't got, you can tell there's no circular references here because you can see it down the bottom, but let me just put in a stupid circular reference. So there's a really common one where you pick up C12 and you're in C12, so you end up with a circular reference. And of course, when you see that error, you should stop whatever you just did, close without saving, or just undo to get rid of that circular reference. But let's say, that you inherited this model, because we don't always get to build our own models. We often inherit other people's models, and you're inheriting their mistakes. So, you open up the model and you're over here, and you see, oh no, there's circular references. Oh, I've got to find, where is it? And you're looking through the model and you're trying to find the circular reference. So the easiest way to find a circular reference is to just go into there. So just going into on the formulas tab, and it will tell you where the circular reference is. It doesn't tell you how to fix it, of course, but it at least can help you to track down and tell you. Quite often, circular reference will be quite gnarly, and there'll be sort of something linked to something else, and it can be, but it can you can start to break it down. So that's a really simple example, but you can start to and you go, okay, so I can see what's gone wrong there, and then you can correct it, and you can start to unpick the circular reference there. So thanks for that question, Naomat. Okay, all right. So the last thing I wanted to talk to you about today was, how are we going for time, Faraz? We okay for another few minutes? So
yes, we are okay.
Okay, good.
We still have another 10 minutes, 10, 20 minutes.
Okay, cool. All right. So I can get into scenarios. Yeah. Because really, a lot of the point of building a financial model is to be able to build scenarios and sensitivity analysis. So, we usually do it at the end. So you've built, but if you use best practice when you've built the financial model, so using all of those things that we've talked about, where you have everything linking back to a single cell or to single assumptions, it's quite simple to build some scenarios and sensitivities. But just a bit of the question I was asked earlier was the difference between each of those. So as we talked about, the sensitivities is to just change one or two input variables. Scenarios involve changing a large number of inputs. So there'll be, interdependencies, and what if analysis, pretty much both. But there's a whole sort of what if analysis tab in Excel on the data tab, and we'll have a look at a couple of those. But here's like a whole different type of whole lot of tools that you can use in Excel to build scenarios. So I'll go through a couple of those with you today, just to give you an idea. We won't go through all of them, but probably they're sort of in order of maybe not. The number one is manual scenario selection. It's probably the most common method of scenario analysis is to do manual scenario selection. So you'd say, best case scenario, all the numbers change. Worst case scenario, all the numbers change. So that's really the most common method of scenario selection. There's usually a data validation dropdown or a combo dropdown. So that's, as an example, something like this, where you'd say best case, all the numbers change. And then we go to worst case, all the numbers change. So base case, all the numbers change. So what we're doing there is we've got a formula. So the formula is, this drop-down box drives the formula for the assumptions, and then the assumptions drive the model. So that's probably the most common type of scenario analysis. But the problem with that, of course, as I'm sure you've already realized, is that you can't look at the scenarios side by side. So it's not really practical to do that. You have to just look at them one at a time. So if you want to look at them side by side, you need to hard code or even use a macro, heaven forbid, having to, paste the values in side by side. So that's probably the, disadvantage of using those. The advantage, though, is that it's easy to build and it's easy to understand. So for people who are fairly new to financial modelling, they find that pretty easy to do. And you can have a whole lot of inputs and outputs, but you can only look at one at a time, and it can be hard to compare them side by side. So and that's using either so this one's using a combo dropdown. So that's just a little object. If you guys haven't used it before, I don't know where my developer tab has suddenly disappeared to. So you would just use the developer tab and just draw the object over the page like that. Or there is another method using a data validation dropdown, which is basically for the user almost exactly the same, but the way that you build it is just using a list in the data validation. So it's very, very similar, but of course the formulas that you use are a little different. So those are the two there. But the other method, so that's your manual scenario selection. I'm not going to talk about Scenario Manager because it's really not that helpful. It's called Scenario Manager, which is great, but I don't really know anyone who uses it very often. It's just a little tool that Excel has, Microsoft has provided, but modelers don't, it's not very commonly used. So we'll jump on to data tables. So that's probably the two that I wanted to really focus on, was the manual scenario selection and data tables. So data tables are pretty tricky, but they're fantastic for sensitivity analysis. So if you want to look at different outputs simultaneously, it's pretty cool. So I'll show you how the data tables work. So that's the last tab just here. And so let's say, for example, so I'll give you this file and it's got all the instructions in there. But let's say, for example, you've got monthly repayment. And so I've just used a PMT, payment function, to calculate if you borrowed this amount, this rate over this many years, it gives you the repayment. But then, of course, if you wanted to run a sensitivity on the interest rate, you'd have to go, 6%, 6.5%. Oh, okay, 7%, so you change it and change it and change it like that. Whereas it would be much more useful if for the user, let me just undo, if we were able to see all of the possible outcomes simultaneously. And so to do that, we just use a data table. So the way that we build it and the instructions are there is that we just need to link it through like that. We need to highlight the whole lot. That's step 2, because it's an array formula. We go into the data table, and then the trickiest part is working out is the row or the column. So the data, the input for the original input for our data table is in a column. So it's going to be the column input cell. So you're asking it to take that cell and replace the inputs with the interest rate, with those cells in the table. And we'll say, okay, go. And that is not working. Hang on. What if analysis, data table, column input cell, the original input is there. Why is that not working? I think I've got my, probably got my calculations, formulas. There we go. I've got my, for some reason, I've got my calculation automatic, except for data tables. I must be working on something really big, and data tables can really slow things down sometimes with your Excel. So sometimes we turn that on. So I just need to make sure that that's on automatic. That's much better. There we go. So that will tell me all of the possible outputs based on those changes in the interest rates. So similarly, you could do the same thing with 2 variables. So you could say, if I were to change the term of the loan and the interest rate here, so I would just link that through to there, like that, highlight the whole lot, go to what if analysis data table, and then this time it's asking you for the row input cell and the column input cell. So the row is the term of the loan, and then the column is the interest rate. We say, okay. And so that gives you basically a little matrix with all the possible outputs of the data table. So that was the data table, which I think is probably the most useful for sensitivity analysis. It's just remembering that we were talking about the difference between sensitivities and scenarios. So sensitivities is where you're just tweaking 1 or 2 variables. So the data table is good for that. Whereas for scenarios, it's probably better the drop downs. So the advantages of a data table is that it can look at multiple outcomes simultaneously, but it can be quite tricky. So they're quite difficult to build because there's all the steps, like you have to highlight the whole lot, you need to link it, and you need to have the row and the column exactly the right place. Otherwise it doesn't work. The inputs and outputs need to be the same. And of course, you can only have 1 or 2 variables in one. Whereas with the drop down, you can have, like, there's no limit to the amount of variables that you can have in there. But remember, when you are doing scenario analysis, that there can be only 1 outcome and it will be wrong, because remember that a financial model is not reality. A financial model is just a construct that is simulating reality. So it's really just an idea that we have. It's a construct of what we think is going to happen. So whatever you put in your scenarios, we sometimes have a bit of a false sense of security. We say that the financial model says that it's going to have, we're going to make all this money, so of course it must be right. And of course we know that that's complete rubbish. So just because the model says it does not mean that it's true. So that was it for the scenarios. Everybody okay with that? Anybody want me to go over anything else, or any questions or comments? Anybody that uses different scenarios? Anything you'd like to discuss? Otherwise, we'll move on and finish up very soon. I think we are just about to time.
Yes, we are just only a minute away now.
Yeah. So it is financial modeling is a wonderful, wonderful career to be in. Yeah, Henry says the term data table is unfortunate. Yeah. Data tables, sound a bit like tables. They actually, what's even more confusing is that you have data tables in charts as well. They're also called data tables. When you put a little table underneath a chart, that's called a data table. And what I just showed you is called a data table. And then there's Excel tables. So the terminology can be quite confusing. Nayamet says, what was the other way apart from data validations that was used in manual scenarios? Yes, we also used a combo drop down. There's a few different ways, but so I used a combo drop down box, which is just a little object, and you can do that. It's on the developer tab. So you can just build that, or of course you can do little tick boxes, or we sometimes have little switch buttons, or like a 1, 2, 3 people use sometimes. So there's multiple ways of creating multiple manual scenario analysis. So yeah, if you are using Excel, if you're working in finance and using Excel, you're already off to a really good start. And having good financial modeling skills, I truly think it's it's such a fantastic skill to have. It's really very much in demand. It's a lot of, there's not that many roles. There are roles for financial modelers. Like, you do see roles advertised for financial modelers, but most of the time it's having, like, you might be whatever else your job is, but having financial modeling skills is often required by employers. So it's such a fantastic skill to have. Tony says, can we know in a summary the difference between your 2 books and the masterclass? In the summit, I'm actually going to be talking about scenario analysis for the keynote. So I'm going to go what we talked about with the scenarios. I'm going to go into that in a lot more detail. For the masterclass, though, I'm going to cover budgeting and forecasting. So it's going to be some financial modeling, but it's more about budgeting techniques and how to build those. So the things that the models that you need to build for the purpose of budgeting and forecasting. So it's not really about financial modeling as such. The Dummies book is kind of like an introduction to financial modeling, whereas this other one is part of the Wiley Finance series, which is using Excel for business and financial modeling. So we use that for training as well sometimes. So it's kind of a different thing. If you are going to put financial modeling on your CV or your resume, you definitely should, if you feel that you can, but don't exaggerate. Make sure that you have some practical application of financial models, and try to apply your financial modeling skills. It's a sort of a practical thing that you should be working on, as take every opportunity in your work. If you want to build or to increase your financial modeling skills, you should try to include that in your work. So if there's any opportunities for building a model, put your hand up for that, or make sure that you are using Excel and applying those principles of best practice and trying to build financial models as you go. And one of the best ways, I think, is to, if you're getting good, is to compete in the Financial Modeling World Cup. So that the Financial Modeling World Cup is an online competition about 8 times a year. The next round is actually coming up this weekend, like tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow it starts. It's like $20 to enter. There's you can be totally anonymous. You can just jump in. It's really hard. I don't know if Ilgar, I know you do a lot of financial modeling. I don't know if you've ever competed in this. It can be really hard. It can be really challenging. I find it really, really, really difficult. They also have Excel as esports. So there's like Excel battles and competitions, which is so there was one recently that was hosted by Oscar Slay and Bill Jellin, Mr. Excel, and I am sometimes the host for these battles, which is lots of fun. There is the FMWC Open coming up later this year. I do believe the prize fund for it's $10,000 for the FMWC Open, but a regular competition, I think the prize fund's even more. It's like 25,000 actually. So yeah, lots of the world of financial modeling. Yeah. The other thing you can do, and I know that Ilgar has done this, is to become a certified financial modeler. So you can become qualified through the Financial Modeling Institute. You can sit a 4-hour exam where you have to build a full set of financial statements, a P&L cash flow balance sheet in 4 hours, and it's all online. It's quite challenging as well. So that's something else that you can do to prove your financial modeling skills. There are not a lot of women in financial modeling, so I run a meetup group for women in financial modeling, and we get together every now and then, and we are getting together next week to talk about the debrief for the Financial Modeling World Cup to see how we went. So, and I do run other meetups. We ran one just on Wednesday. So I have different sorts of meetups coming up. And of course, the virtual summit that's coming up for the My Data Summit. So lots and lots of events coming up, lots of ways to get involved in financial modeling. So that's the link if you want to check it out. Although actually I know Faraz always publishes the events that we have on various meetups. So thank you for doing that, Faraz. So it's such an amazing community. All the people who get together and love Excel, we all kind of promote each other's events. And we'll send out a copy of the file. I probably hang out on LinkedIn. It's probably the place where I spend most of my time. So you can check me out on LinkedIn, and or drop me a line if you have any questions about what we've talked about or anything you'd like to discuss. And I'd love to see you at the My Data Summit. That's would be really, really cool. So any questions? Lastly, I think we've kind of covered questions as we go. But feel free.
Danielle, sorry, let me ask in this way. When is the exam for Financial Modeling Institute? I mean, Advanced Financial Modeler exam. When is it going to happen? Yeah.
The next one?
The next one, yes.
Yeah, it's in July.
In July? In July and in November, right? 2 times, yes.
Yeah, I think it's October, the next one. Yeah.
And regarding Financial Modeling Cup, I mean, the battle, Excel battle you were talking about, what's the best source to study? Because this kind of stuff just requires, more practice. So
yeah. I mean, it's just a great way to practice. I'd recommend that you just give it a go. Just sign up. You get 3 cases, and like if you get through 1 case, you're doing well. So it's quite hard. It's quite it doesn't take it takes a lot of time. Like you have 2 hours, and there's like no way you can get through it in 2 hours. But yeah, it's the elite at the elite level. People are getting like full marks. It's amazing what some people can do. And but just give it a go. And when you enter, they'll send you the solutions, so you can sort of take it afterwards. You can take it apart and see how you did. And that's just a really fun way of improving your financial modeling skills.
So I can just add it over here, since I'm not a financial modeler, but if I'm going into the battle, I'm going to make sure that I first read Danielle book, and then I enter the battle. Yeah. So she really have that great book. I have read it, but unfortunately I didn't get a chance to participate in the battle because of events and other things. But yes, I will be looking forward on that. And as Danielle, she will share the link of her book also. You can go and grab that one. It's a really good book, and it's a really great source of information you have added, Danielle. Really love it. And we have just hit the clock and it's time up. And just let me quickly share my screen again. So I'm just going to share it. This is the My Data Summit website. I hope you can see the screen. You can see my screen. This,
Yes.
yeah, this is perfect. So this is My Data Summit. What we have, what are the key topics, and we have this amazing speakers over here. We have our sponsors, and we are the organizer, myself and Mr. Elgar. And you can go and quickly check agenda, which is jam-packed with these 33 sessions, and we would be doing it over here. And then the master classes, what are the master classes that are happening? And this is a speaker list, which is over here with all the speakers added over here. Great, some speakers. We are going to get some a Python speaker as well on Excel. We'll be talking about Excel with Python. And we have Danielle, who will be talking about the summit session. You can just go and read about it, and the masterclass also, and you can just go and enroll it straight away from here. So that's all for today. And I think Danielle, it was really wonderful session from your side. And I'm just checking the chat right now because I have another screen which is in placed over here. That's the reason. And it was really lovely to have you over here. But my friends, don't sign out from Zoom right now because we're going to have some after party of the event after this meetup. So stay back on the Zoom because the guest will be over here. And we can just have a chat. But we will be going sign out from YouTube. But before that, Danielle, I would like to ask you to say any kind of quote or any message to our audiences. This is what I do always on my meetup. So any kind of quote, maybe from a Spider-Man movie or from a book or even from your book as well. So that can inspire us. And so please, Danielle.
A quote. Oh, I don't know.
Anything.
Yeah, I don't know. You've
Last
you've surprised me with that. So yeah, I don't know. There's so many things about Excel, but I think just just continuing to improve your skills and yeah, just trying to get as good as you can. It's just such a fantastic skill to have. It's the best thing you can do for your career, I think, is improve your Excel skills.
Lovely, guys. Signing out from YouTube, and see you soon in the next session. So please follow the meetup, and I'll be looking forward to see you at My Data Summit event. Signing out from YouTube. Bye.
Bye.